These are not just stories. These are real horrors, unsolved mysteries that haunt the past, and maybe even the present. A killer who terrorized New Orleans, striking at random, his identity never uncovered. Clowns appearing in the shadows, stalking the streets yet never caught. A family slaughtered on their own farm, the footprints of their killer leading only one way, inside. The Axeman, the phantom clowns, the footsteps in the snow, 3 real-life nightmares. Are you ready to step into the darkness? New Orleans, 1918. A city alive with music, mystery, and something darker, something that crept through the humid, gaslit streets like a specter in the night. By day, the city pulsed with life, its markets bustling, its people a mix of Creole, Sicilian, and Southern culture, a melting pot of tradition and tension. By night, however, a growing terror loomed. The fear did not arrive all at once. It crept slowly, insidiously, with each gruesome discovery. It began with a blood-stained bed, a shattered door, and the lifeless bodies of Joseph and Catherine Maggio, a Sicilian grocer and his wife, found in their home on Upper Line Street in May 1918. Their throats had been slit with a razor so deep it nearly decapitated them, and their skulls had been caved in by an axe, left carelessly at the crime scene. The authorities were baffled. Robbery had not been the motive. Money and valuables remained untouched. There was no sign of forced entry, save for a panel on the back door, chiseled away just enough for a hand to reach inside and unlock it. Rumors spread like wildfire. The police arrested Joseph's brother, claiming his straight razor had been used in the murders. But many were unconvinced. Whispers of a phantom-like killer filled the air, a being who could slip through the night unseen, choosing victims at random. The newspapers dubbed him the Axeman. Then the killings continued. Weeks later, another grocer, Louis Bissouma, was found barely alive beside his wife Harriet in the back of their store. His head had been split open with an axe, and Harriet, though clinging to life, could only mutter vague accusations before succumbing to her wounds. Again, there was no robbery. Again, the entry had been forced through a chiseled door panel. Panic took hold of the city. Who would be next? Why were grocers being targeted? Some suspected the mafia. Others spoke of a supernatural force, a demon with an insatiable hunger for blood. By the end of the summer, fear choked the streets like the thick Louisiana heat. People began to sleep with axes beside their beds, shotguns resting against door frames. The sound of a knock in the middle of the night sent shivers down spines. No one felt safe, because the Axeman chose at random, and there was no predicting when he would strike next. New Orleans was no stranger to crime, but this was different. This was something primal, something that burrowed into the very soul of the city. And in the weeks to come, it would only get worse. The city had become a hunting ground, and the Axeman had just begun his work. The Axeman was no ordinary killer. He did not lurk in alleyways, nor did he strike with the crude desperation of a common criminal. He was something else entirely, a phantom with an axe, slipping through the night like a wraith, choosing his victims with an eerie precision. As the summer of 1918 bled into autumn, more bodies surfaced. Anna Schneider, 8 months pregnant, was attacked in her sleep. Her scalp had been torn open, yet she survived, though she could recall nothing of the assault. Just weeks later, a young couple, Edward and Rosie Cortimiglia, were found in a similar state, bludgeoned in their beds, their child left unharmed. Once again, a back door had been chiseled open. Once again, nothing was stolen. The city reeled. Families barricaded themselves inside at night, windows nailed shut, shotguns at the ready. The Axeman's killings bore a cruel intelligence. He struck without warning and vanished without a trace, leaving behind only blood and splintered wood. Some believed he had no human form at all, that he was a spectre from the city's cursed past, a revenant of the bayou. Others whispered of a deeper madness, a man who killed for pleasure, choosing his victims at random, reveling in their screams. The newspapers fed the frenzy, printing theories that ranged from the mundane to the macabre. Was he a deranged butcher? A cultist performing dark rites? A spirit summoned from the depths of hell? No one knew. All that was certain was that he would strike again, and when he did, the city would tremble once more. By early 1919, the Axeman had woven himself into the very fabric of New Orleans folklore. He was more than a man. He had become a legend, a whispered terror in back-alley taverns and hushed conversations between shopkeepers. And then, in March, the killer did something no one expected. He spoke. A letter addressed to the Times-Picayune arrived at the newspaper's offices. It was dated March 13th, 1919, and was signed simply, The Axeman. The contents sent chills through the city. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. He taunted the authorities, mocked their attempts to capture him. But the most chilling part of the letter came at the end, a proclamation that on the night of March 19th, he would pass through the city, and any home not playing jazz music would meet his axe. It was a demand both absurd and terrifying. Play jazz and you live. Remain silent, and you die. That night, New Orleans became a citywide concert. From grand mansions to humble tenements, jazz spilled out into the streets. Bars overflowed with patrons desperate to drown out the fear. Brass bands played deep into the night, laughter and music intertwining with terror. And miraculously, no one died that evening. But the Axeman was far from finished. The letter proved one thing: he enjoyed the fear, thrived on it. He was not just a killer. He was an orchestrator of dread, a composer of chaos. And as the weeks passed, the people of New Orleans waited, knowing that their phantom would return. He had given them his word. The night of jazz had passed, but the Axeman's promise of silence did not last. Weeks later, in August of 1919, he struck again. This time the victim was Steve Boca, another grocer, found unconscious in his home with his skull split open by an axe. He survived, but like the others, he could recall nothing of the attack. Then, just a month later, Sarah Laumann, a young woman, was discovered in her bed, her head bashed in, her door forced open in the same telltale manner. The Axeman was back, and New Orleans was running out of time. The city had hoped that the music had satisfied him, but the killing had only paused. Now, the nightmare had returned. Then, just as suddenly as he had arrived, the Axeman disappeared. The final known attack occurred in October of 1919, when Mike Pepitone was found murdered in his home, his skull shattered by the familiar blows of an axe. His wife, though witness to the aftermath, saw only a fleeting shadow, too fast, too elusive to name. And then, silence. The killing stopped. The city, though still haunted, slowly exhaled. The Axeman had vanished, leaving behind only bloodstains and legend. Decades passed, and the Axeman of New Orleans became a ghost story, whispered in dimly lit bars, a piece of southern folklore entwined with the city's dark history. He was never caught. No one knows if he was a lone madman, A shadowy assassin? Or something worse? Something beyond human comprehension? Theories emerged. Some believed he had fled New Orleans, his bloodlust satiated. Others thought he had simply died, taking his secrets with him. And then there were those who claimed he never left, that he still walks the streets on foggy nights, his axe in hand, waiting for the music to stop. New Orleans moved on, but the fear lingered, like a note left hanging in the humid air. The city had survived, but it had not forgotten. And somewhere in the depths of history, the Axeman still waits, listening for silence, ready to strike once more. Boston, 1981. The school bell had just rung, and the streets were filled with the chatter of children walking home. Tommy Reeves, only 7 years old, clutched his backpack as he shuffled down the sidewalk, the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement. The city had always felt familiar, safe even, but today there was something different in the air. A hush, a stillness between the spaces where laughter should have been. Tommy didn't notice the van at first. It was parked just beyond the curb near the playground, its dull blue paint chipping away. But what he did notice was the man, or rather, the thing inside it. A clown, bright and garish, with a painted grin stretched too wide, its eyes dark and hollow. It waved at him, slow and deliberate. "Hey, kid," the clown called out, its voice high and sing-song, almost like a cartoon. "Want a balloon?" Tommy froze. Something about it wasn't right. The makeup looked smudged, uneven, as if the face beneath was trying to push through. His little heart pounded. The clown held up a cluster of balloons, red and yellow, bobbing gently in the breeze. "No, thanks," Tommy muttered, taking a step back. "Oh, don't be scared," the clown cooed, its head tilting slightly. "Come closer. I've got candy too." Tommy's breath hitched. His mother's warnings about strangers rang in his ears. But the clown wasn't moving, just watching, waiting. Then the van door began to slide open. Panic surged through him. Without another word, he turned and bolted down the street, his small legs pumping as fast as they could. He didn't dare look back. The only sound behind him was the clang of the van door shutting and the screech of tires peeling away. By the time Tommy reached home, his chest heaving, he tried to explain to his mother what had happened. But when the police arrived and searched the area, there was nothing. No van, no clown, no trace of anything at all. And yet, Tommy wasn't the only one. Over the next few weeks, more children whispered the same story. Clowns in dark vans, clowns hiding behind trees, clowns watching from alleyways, smiling with teeth too big, eyes too hungry. But no one ever caught them. No adult ever saw them, and the clowns never left behind a single footprint. Boston was just the beginning. The clowns were spreading. The reports multiplied. Parents clutched their children's hands a little tighter. Teachers walked kids to buses in groups. Strangers were met with narrowed eyes, especially those in oversized jackets or with too wide smiles. The first news reports came just days after Tommy's sighting. A group of children at a nearby elementary school had seen a clown lurking by the playground fence, watching them. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there grinning. By the time an adult had come to investigate, the figure had vanished. Then came the reports from outside the city. A girl in Cambridge claimed a clown in a dirty yellow suit had whispered to her from behind a tree. In Somerville, a boy swore a clown had been following him on his way home from school, keeping just far enough behind that he couldn't see its face. The police took the reports seriously at first. Officers patrolled school zones, questioned shop owners, and searched for a mysterious van, but they found nothing. No tire tracks, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage. Skeptics dismissed it all as hysteria, a case of mass panic fueled by playground rumors. But the children knew better, because the clowns were still watching, and they were getting closer. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the clowns were gone. By the end of the month, the reports dwindled. The strange vans stopped showing up near schools. No more children ran home breathless, claiming to have seen grinning figures in alleyways. The fear, once so suffocating, began to loosen its grip on the city. The police shrugged it off. Just mass hysteria, the experts claimed. A trick of the imagination. But for those who had seen them, the memory didn't fade so easily. Some children insisted they still saw them in their dreams. Clowns peering through bedroom windows, their red lips stretching into impossible grins. Others whispered that the clowns hadn't left at all, that they were simply hiding, waiting for the right moment to return. Then, reports surfaced from a town hundreds of miles away. Different state, same stories. The clowns had moved on. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. From Boston to Kansas City, from Chicago to Miami, the sightings followed a chilling pattern. First, a single report. A child seeing a clown near their school or outside their bedroom window. Then more. Each story eerily similar. The strange vans, the whispers, the painted smiles that never quite reached their hollow eyes. Police departments exchanged notes, but no suspects were ever found. No bodies, no kidnappings, just fear, spreading like a virus. Paranormal investigators took an interest. Could it be something else? Something not entirely human? Some whispered of an urban legend come to life. A spirit that fed off fear, a presence that could only be seen by children. The idea was dismissed as nonsense by the authorities. But the children knew the truth. Because when the clowns disappeared from one town, it was only a matter of time before they appeared somewhere else. Waiting, watching, smiling. As the years passed, the sightings continued, but something changed. The clowns no longer tried to lure children away, they simply watched. A boy in Ohio saw a clown standing beneath a street lamp, motionless, staring at his bedroom window for hours. A girl in Texas woke in the middle of the night to find a clown peeking through the crack of her slightly opened closet door. No footprints, no sounds, just silence. Adults began to take notice, but by then, it was too late. The clowns weren't just in alleyways or vans anymore. They were in homes, in dreams, in places they were never meant to be. The reports would always fade. The panic would always pass. But the clowns never truly left. And somewhere, even now, they are still watching, waiting, smiling. The reports never stop. Every few years in different cities, the stories return. The clown by the schoolyard, the face in the window, the one standing too still at the edge of the woods. They are not forgotten. They are not imagined. They are waiting, patient as ever. And somewhere, right now, a child is looking out their window, seeing something they shouldn't. A painted grin in the darkness. A hand raised in a slow, deliberate wave. The clowns are still here, and they always will be. Andreas Gruber wiped the sweat from his brow as he stepped out into the cold evening air. The Bavarian countryside stretched out before him in the fading light, the wind carrying with it a chill that bit through his heavy coat. Something about the night unsettled him, though he could not place why. It had been a long day tending to the farm, but there was an unease that had settled deep in his bones, an unease that had begun weeks earlier. It was the footprints that started it. Days ago, in the crisp morning snow, he had noticed them. Deep, deliberate prints leading from the dense forest at the edge of the farmstead, stopping just at the threshold of the barn. There were no prints leading back. Whoever had made them had not left. At first he dismissed it. Perhaps a traveler passing through, seeking shelter in the cold. But no one had come forward, and there was no sign of anyone inside the barn. The horses were uneasy, shifting and snorting in their stalls. His wife, Kazilia, had warned him of strange noises, footsteps in the attic, the rustling of things unseen in the night, but he had waved it off as nonsense. Now, as he stood in the darkness, he was not so sure. The wind carried the scent of damp earth, and beneath it, something else, something metallic like rust or blood. He turned toward the barn, peering through the slats of wood. The horses stomped nervously, their ears flicking toward something he could not see. Then, from above, a soft creak. His blood ran cold. The attic. Andreas swallowed hard, gripping the lantern in his hand. The flickering light cast long shadows across the wooden beams as he stepped toward the ladder leading up into the darkness. He hesitated, staring into the yawning blackness above him. Another sound, a slow, deliberate step, just beyond the edge of the light. His breath caught in his throat. Someone was up there. He forced himself to climb, the wooden rungs groaning beneath his weight. The lantern quivered in his grip as he reached the top, its glow barely piercing the suffocating dark. The attic was empty, at least that's how it seemed. And yet, the feeling remained. A presence, something watching. A whisper of movement behind him. Andreas spun around, his heart hammering. Nothing, only dust swirling in the lantern light. He exhaled, shaking his head. Maybe his wife's worries had gotten to him after all. Maybe he was just tired. But as he climbed back down, the feeling never left. The footprints had never led away from the barn, and someone was still here. The next night, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the farmhouse walls. Cecilia sat by the table, her fingers clutching a cup of warm milk, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Across from her, Victoria, their daughter, tried to soothe little Joseph to sleep. Andreas sat near the window, pipe in hand, staring out into the night. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, rattling the shutters as though someone, or something, was trying to get in. He had searched the attic again earlier that day. Nothing. No footprints. No sign of an intruder. And yet the barn doors had been left open again. The lock had been undone. He had latched it shut himself. And yet it was as if the farm had a mind of its own, opening wounds he could not heal. Then there was the dog. He had barked relentlessly at the barn that afternoon, his fur bristling, teeth bared. Now he lay silent on the porch, as if exhausted from warning a family that refused to listen. A gust of wind rattled the house again. Or was it the wind? Andreas tapped his pipe against the wooden table, frowning. "I should check the barn," he muttered. Gazilia's eyes flicked up. "Andreas, leave it. Come to bed. You're just feeding the fear." He exhaled through his nose. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was imagining things. Then came the knock. Software, hollow. Just once. The room fell silent. Even little Joseph stopped fussing. The wind no longer howled. The farmhouse held its breath. Andreas rose slowly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He moved to the door and pressed his ear against it. Silence. He lifted the latch, stepping onto the porch. The cold night air stung his skin. The yard stretched out before him, bathed in the eerie glow of the moon. Nothing. No movement. Then a shuffle from the barn. He turned sharply. The doors stood ajar again, swaying slightly in the breeze. He could feel eyes on him, lurking in the unseen corners of the night. Andreas hesitated. Then he stepped forward. It was the last decision he would ever make. The sun rose the next morning over Hinterkaifeck, casting pale light over the farmstead. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. The animals, as always, needed tending. The townspeople grew concerned when no one from the Gruber family appeared in town that morning. The mailman noted that the previous day's letters remained untouched. Something was wrong. When neighbors finally arrived at the farm, the eerie quiet unnerved them. The farmhouse door creaked open. The kitchen was tidy, the table set as if waiting for a meal that would never come. Then they found the first bodies. Stacked in the barn, covered with straw, lay Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and little Cecilia, their skulls brutally crushed. The bodies had been arranged almost deliberately, as if the killer had lingered. Inside the house, the nightmare continued. In their beds, young Joseph and the maid Maria were found slain the same way, asleep, defenseless. The most disturbing detail. The farm had been lived in for days after the murders. The animals had been fed, meals had been prepared and eaten. A shadow had moved through the house, unseen, and whoever had done this had vanished without a trace. They were never found. Perhaps they are still listening. Perhaps they never left.